It's a real pleasure for me to be here to talk to you about Joseph Schumpeter's major contribution to economics. He emphasized the dynamic, innovative aspects of capitalism, of the market economy, rather than static efficiency that then and since has been the major focus of at least a large fraction of economists. I think he rightly recognized that the gains to our society from the increases in productivity far outweigh those associated with allocative efficiency, or even the accumulation of capital. It was innovation that really mattered. And if we think more broadly about why it is that our standards of living are so much higher today than they were 250 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, it's because of the advances of science, because of innovations in modes of social organization, as well as in technology. The question is to what extent can we rely on the market for this on its own, and how do we balance this aspect? How do we appraise it vis-a-vis the static efficiency? So one of the things that some of my own research pointed out, research with Bruce Greenwald, was that there is often a tension between static efficiency and dynamic efficiency, and that the traditional emphasis on static efficiency probably cost many countries a great deal. The standard Washington consensus policies that were pursued by the World Bank focused traditionally on static efficiency. But that may have stifled some of the opportunities for learning and innovation that would have raised even more standards of living even more. The kind of case that very emblematic of that is Korea. After the Korean War, the question was, what should be Korea's economic strategy? And the standard advice of the international institutions, for instance, would have been follow your comparative advantage. And at that time, given Korea's low standards of living, low levels of human capital, its comparative advantage was growing rice. And Korea's response was, in effect, thank you, but no thank you. Even if we are a successful rice grower, we won't be a modern industrial country, and our standard of living will be accordingly lower. And therefore, they embarked on this strategy of trying to close the knowledge gap between them and the advanced countries. Part of closing that knowledge gap is the process of learning how to produce, learning how to be an industrial economy. And the only way you can do that kind of learning is by doing. You can't read about it in a textbook. The only way that Korea was going to learn about producing steel was by producing steel. And it got a factory into Korea, and over time became one of, if not the most productive producers of steel. Now you can say, well, it was part of its dynamic comparative advantage, but that's very hard to ascertain ex ante. So what is very clear is that this kind of dynamic innovation was far more important than static allocative efficiency. And while Korea may have, in the short run, lost something in its by pursuing that route, by imposing trade restrictions, over the long run, what it gained was far, far greater than what it lost. That is actually one of the central messages of a paper and recent book that I've written with Bruce Greenwald. The book was called Creating a Learning Society, and the book was Helping Infant Economies Grow. Another important and interesting aspect of Schumpeter's perspective was that it was evolutionary, seeing the world as ever-changing. The change was self-endogenous, as opposed to equilibrium theory, again, which was at the center of much of economic analysis at the time, and has continued to be at the center of much economic analysis. I think economists ought to be paying more attention to these kinds of evolutionary approaches as opposed to the equilibrium approaches, which have not served us very well in many areas, including in macroeconomics. So much for the praise of Schumpeter. But Schumpeter, and many of his followers, I think, were too sanguine that markets worked well. The first welfare theorem about the efficiency of markets ignored all the concerns that Schumpeter was concerned with. The model assumes that technology is fixed. There is no general welfare theorem on innovation. There is no theorem that says the market processes on their own are going to be efficient in any way, efficient either in the level of investment, in the pace, in the choice of the research technologies, and the amount of risk-taking. There's absolutely no theorem that argues that markets in general are efficient. In fact, there's some essential problems associated with innovation and innovation economies. Competition tends to be limited. They give rise to risk that cannot be insured. They're associated with investment in R&D requires investment, but the investment runs into problems of capital market imperfections, which are inherent in asymmetries of information, and asymmetries of information are inherent in the innovation process. So the market imperfections that we see are not an accident. They are inherent in the dynamic processes with which Schumpeter was concerned. But Schumpeter was not very worried, for instance, about monopoly. He said monopoly was temporary. Many of his followers said, don't worry about monopoly competition. To be the monopolist would suffice to ensure efficiency and would itself induce a high level of innovation. Each of those propositions has been challenged, has been shown to be theoretically not defensible. In some work I did a number of years ago with the Partha Dasgupta, we showed that how an incumbent monopolist could engage in actions to entrench himself and to make its monopoly power last a very long time. In some of my own work, I showed that the competition to be monopolist, which is sometimes called the contestability doctrine, did not ensure efficiency. And then in some other work on patent races, I was able to show with my colleagues that a patent race is the incumbent could get ahead, slightly ahead of others, just enough to discourage follower-ons, and that in fact In a market where there are dominant firms, the level of innovation might actually be lower than if we had stronger antitrust laws, more competition. So the sanguine view of innovation and markets, that the markets just always are going to result in efficient allocation of resources to innovation, has been, I think, basically discredited. But now we are aware of at least three other problems that innovation may actually have adverse consequences. For instance, there has been a lot of innovation by monopolists and but those with market power and how to extend, augment their market power, extend it over time, extend it into other areas. And so innovation can lead to amplification of market power. There's also been innovation on how to extract more rents from the monopoly power, how to extract more consumer surplus, how to behave, in a sense, as a more ruthless monopolist, creating effective barriers to entry, and then being able at the same time to take advantage of others, of their vulnerabilities. And we've also become aware that innovation does not necessarily address some core social problems. For instance, it may make matters even worse. We don't really need more innovation to replace unskilled labor, given the amount of global unemployment of unskilled labor. Yet, much of the innovation that we see today is doing exactly that. We should have a lot more innovation on how to reduce carbon emissions. How do we reduce the impact on the environment? But there's very little innovation, insufficient innovation in those areas. And we've seen more recently the use of artificial intelligence by the social media to have an enormous number of multiple social harms, from political manipulation to a whole variety of exploitations. So what we've seen is that innovation by itself is not necessarily good. You could become, you could have innovation in ways that, for instance, undermine the basic price system, which is what the ability to target advertising on different groups, charging them different prices, can do. The implication of all of this is we need to steer and regulate regulations. We have to encourage the kind of regulations that will lead to a better social well-being. Underlying all of innovation is basic research. And that inevitably it will have to be done largely by government, or at least supported with government finance. So Schumpeter was right on the importance of innovation. He was right that innovation is endogenous. It's the result of what we do. And the question that we need to face today is, how can we encourage innovation to move in the direction that enhances societal well-being? That is one of the major challenges that we face today. Thank you.